Hi everyone, this is the third video in the series on learning how to use VBA. So if you are just coming to the channel for the first time and you want to go back to the videos, you just need to go to the channel and go to the playlist, and you should be able to find the earlier episodes. So in this particular lesson, what we're going to learn about is the use of loops. So loops are one of those things which is very useful for making your code more efficient and reducing the number of lines of actual code you need to actually use to do a particular function. So let's give you an example of that. So for example here I've got a series of code where I am basically placing numbers um, into different cells. If I run that code now and go to what it does, we can see that it produces 10 lines of data. Now, if um, if you to produce that, we need to use a single line of code for each and every number that's placed into the sheets. Now, what loops do is it allows you to use the same code over and over and over again, because the limitation of coding it in the way that I just showed you is that if you have, for example, a report where you want to place either a value or a formula next to 1,000 lines of data, for example, that approach becomes impractical, and the need to use loops is really critical. Okay, so let's start by show you the commands of creating a loop. So we're going to create a new sub, which will, if I can spell, sub, and we'll call it loops. Okay. Now the first thing we need to do is loops always use a variable. So I'm going to define a variable counter. Okay. And once I've defined my variable, which I will use in the loop, I then need to create the start of the loop. So the start of the loop is a for command, and then followed by the variable that you've declared. In my case, I've created counter. And the way that loops work is that in the first line of the for statement, what you're actually doing is defining the value of the loop, the value of the variable as it goes through the loop the first time. Okay, so I'm going to set it to 1. And what you're also defining is how many times you're going to go through the loop. So I'm going to put 2, and I'm going to put, just for the moment, I'm going to put in 100. Okay, so basically what that means is the loop is going to go through 100 times. So it goes from 1 to 100. Now, the third part of the for statement is the step command. So what the step command is it's telling you um, how many steps to make. So for example, I put the value 1, that means that the first time it goes through the loop, the counter, the value of the variable counter is going to equal 1. And then the second time it will step up by a value of 1. So that means the next time it goes through, it will be 2, 3, 4, etc. Now, if you want to change that number to 2, what's going to happen is the value of the variable is going to go from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7, and obviously you can also make it negative numbers and have it count down as well. Now that is basically the start of the loop. Now the second thing we need to tell the VBA programmer is where to actually end the loop and repeat. Okay, so the way that we do that is we put a next statement and we put in our variable. So that's basically saying that any code in here will be will be repeatedly used until this value is satisfied. Okay, so and to give you an example, and instead of 100, I'm going to just make it 5 because otherwise it will become annoying. And I'm going to put a message box in. I'm going to show what happens to the value of the counter. So message box, and then we can put in the counter of the value. So basically what's happening is that each time we place the go through the variable, it's going to display the value of the variable. So the first time it's going to go through, it's going to show us 1, and then 2, then 3, then 4, etc. So if I run the code now, okay, we see the first time it goes through the loop, the second time it uses the same code again, the third time, the fourth time, etc. And obviously, if you then then change it to step, okay, we do steps of 2 instead. If we run it again, we'll see that what's happening is that we go for 1, 3, 5, and then it's done. And of course you can, if I switch these numbers over, as I mentioned at the start, and I said I'm going to go for a step of -1, you can see that what's happening is the same code is being used over in a reverse order. So I've set the variable initially at 5 and it's counting down by values of 1. Okay, so that's pretty much how counters work, how a loop works. Now, at this point, it probably doesn't, mean a great deal as to how useful these things actually are. So we're going to do an example now where what I'm going to do is place a bit of code in the middle. Okay, and so what we're doing is we're going to assign the value. So I'm just going to reuse the code I have. So that's going to give me the sheet name, the range, and then the value counter. Okay. So, and what I'm going to do here, just so we can stop the code, I'm going to use the message box to stop the code each time the loop is going through, just to show you kind of what's happening and how we need to adjust the code to be able to get it to do useful things. Okay, so we've basically got the code saying it's going to go to cell A1, it's going to put the value counter into the cell each and every time, and we'll just clear, because that's where the data is going to go. Clear that. Okay, so now if we run our code, push play, so what happens is it's placed a value in the cell, it's shown us the value of the counter. Now it's placed a value in the cell and it's shown us the value of the counter. So that's all very fine, but the problem is, as you can see from the code already, that because I've got a static reference to the cell, that means that it's placing, each time the code's being used, which may be sometimes what you want to do, it's basically placing the value into the same cell on top of it, one after another. Now, if I didn't have the message box, what would happen is it would just appear with the number 5 because that was the last value of the counter. This kind of shows you what's actually happening. Now, if we want to put some values in and we want to put them down a range of cells, what we need to do is allow the code in the middle of the loop to become dynamic. So we need to use variables. Now, if you have a look here, what we've got is we've got a cell A1 range. Now, because we're going down the one sheet, that never changes, so that's okay to be static. But here, the problem is that we're going down and we're always referencing cell A1. So what we want to do is we want to set up that code so that if we want to do what we want to display the values, it means the first time it goes through it's cell A1, then it's cell A2, then 3, then 4, then 5. So we need that cell reference to change. Now the way that you do that is this whole bracket is essentially just like a message box, in that if you fill in the data and make it adjust to the things that you want, it will just respond. So I'll show you what I mean. So if we want to be in column A1, and then we want to display the value of counter. So basically what we're doing is the first time it goes through the cell, it's A and whatever the value of counter is. So the cell reference is A1. The second time it goes through, okay, so the counter value goes up by 1, then it becomes cell A2, etc. So if we do that, and I'm going to remove because this is, you don't need that. Now if I do that now and push play, okay, and we go to our code, you'll see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's placed the code in exactly where we want. So that allows us to then basically put in whatever we want, cell after cell after cell, to be able to basically get it to apply code over a large number. So if we want to turn this now into 100 lines and we push play, you'll see that when we come back here, immediately the code is scalable and it's done all this work for us. So that's really the power of basically loops. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to show you an example of how we might use this sort of same concept to basically basically use the loop to do a series of calculations. So just to keep it simple, what I have is I have 2 lines um, of code. Okay, so 2 lines of numbers. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to want to put in the value of each one of these numbers. Okay, so we can either do that by creating a formula like this. Okay, and we'll do it both ways. Okay, a formula like that where we're adding those 2 numbers together. So we want to get a piece of code to be able to take those 100 values and add them all together to produce the sum in column C. Now to do that, there's 2 ways in which you can do it, and we can talk about the advantage and disadvantage of these approaches. So basically, and I'm not going to bother rewriting the code, I'm just going to reuse what I've got. So for example, I want a counter of 100, so I've already got my loop set up, and if I want to apply the calculation to column C, then I need to change the cell reference to column C. So now it's going to go down looking at column C one after another. Okay. Now, if I want to add the 2 numbers together, I can do it in 2 different ways. So firstly, I can do it by getting it to just place the number into the cell, or I can get it to actually put the formula that we just put into the cell before. So we'll do it both ways. So the first way is the easiest way. So I'm going to copy the cell reference, okay, and I'm going to put in 2 copies of that. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're basically saying we're going to make that, as we move down the cell, we're going to make, each time we move down the cell, we're going to add the number from column A, and you'll see that we're using the same method for referencing the values in the cell, and then we're going to add them together, just like what we've done in previous lessons. Okay, so then if we have column B, okay, we've got our piece of code. So if we push play there, okay, and we go back to our thing, you can see, back to our file, you can see that it is adding those numbers together one after another. Okay, now in this case, what we've done is we've just done the calculation, we've placed it directly into the cell. The other way to do it, which is useful to know as well, is there's no reason why you cannot place in the actual calculation. So the calculation that we were after, and whenever you're doing this, sometimes people have trouble visualizing it, is what's best is to actually create the formula in Excel of what you want to place in each one of these cells, so that we've got a template to then put into our code. Okay, so and that's made a ding because I've still got an active cell. Now, the next thing that we want to do is I'm going to turn this code off temporarily, and we're going to do it where we want to leave the formula in there. Okay, so this is the stuff that we need to place into the cell to get it to work. Okay, so the first part of the code doesn't change in that we're referencing the same cell. So we're having this cell here. Okay, now what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to put in that value, this expression into the code. Okay, so the A equal A1 plus B1. Okay, so to do that, what we need to do is we can start by copying that code and placing it into the cell just to start off with. Okay, so now we've got it in there, we can push play and we can run and see what we get. Now what we get is, you can see that we get the calculation completed, but the problem is we get the calculation completed in every single cell. And the reason is that we've hard coded in what the cell references are rather than making them dynamic with the change in the value of the column. Because what we want is we want to go from A1 plus B1, and the next cell it wants to be A2 plus B2 to be able to make the calculation to work. So to do that, we can use our skills, which we sort of learnt a little bit about in the previous lesson. So we need to break down what we need to change this expression to make it dynamic. So we can do that piece by piece. So the first thing is we know that this part of the expression is never going to change. Okay, we're always going to have that A at column A because we're always referencing column A. What we want to change is the number. Now, in the number, instead of putting 1 all the time, we're going to put in the value of the counter, which is changing as each time it goes through the loop. Okay. And instead of a plus, we actually need to put an N, sorry. Okay, and then if we go to the next part of the expression that never changes, is we're always adding B plus B. So we can put that in as some text, like that, and then we just need to add the value of the counter again. Okay, and that hopefully should work. So if we push play, okay, and you'll see that now what we've done is we've got the same result as we did initially, but now we have the formulas moving up and down. So, and the advantage of that is that obviously if someone comes along and changes the spreadsheet, then the value changes automatically. So that is an option. The disadvantage of that is that sometimes, for example, if you do things like VLOOKUPs and stuff like that, where there's large amounts of VLOOKUPs and there's recalculations, it can actually slow your spreadsheet down. But generally, it's not a huge issue unless you're getting a really, really large spreadsheet. And that's pretty much how you use loops, if that makes sense. Okay, so what we're going to get you guys to do now that you've learned, actually one more thing before we give you an exercise to do. One other thing to be aware of is sometimes, and in the examples I've given so far, the counter number for the variable basically is used to count down the cell value each and every time. And in this particular case, in the example we have here, the counter value or the cell row reference always equals the counter value that we need. Okay. Now sometimes there might be a need to actually have it offset by 1 or 2 or 3 or do something like that. Now when you do that, you can, instead of just using counter, you can have counter plus 1, for example. Whoops, plus 1. And we'll just do it for both, plus 1 for each one of these. Okay, so if we run those now, okay, what you can see is that we're doing a calculation on the fly, and you see that what we've done is the counter value is 1. The counter value of the row number is 1, but we actually wanted to reference these two cells. So by just adding a plus 1 or whatever, then you can actually offset the values. Okay, so that's probably all we need to know about loops. And the key next step is to make sure that you get a bit of practice doing it yourself. Now, it's really important when we're doing these exercises, if you're learning code, is to make sure that it's all very well to follow along what someone's doing, but until you actually solve a problem for yourself, then then you don't really learn how to apply the code. Okay, so what we're going to get you guys to do as an exercise is we want you to be able to put in the value, the 2 times tables for 100 rows. So for example, in cell A1, we want you to end up with 2 times by, 1 times by 2 equals the value, which would be 2 in this case, and then in the next row, 2 times 2 equals 4, and we want you to be able to place that calculation with the text and the resultant number into the cells in cell row A, and we want you to do it for 100 cells. Okay, so have a go at that. Make sure you're having a go before you and pause the video and then come back for the solution. Okay, so hopefully you've had an attempt at that particular exercise, and we'll go through the process of creating the code to be able to solve that problem. Okay, so we'll start from scratch so that we go through the whole process. Okay, I'm going to create a new sub. Okay, and I am going to have the sub value, the sub name 2 times table. Okay. Oh, I can't have a 2 in there. Times table, that will do. Okay, so first job is we need to create a variable. In this case, I'm going to put dim, and I'm going to put, instead of counter, I'm going to put in row, because row seems to make a little bit more sense because we're using that counter to create the row numbers. The next thing we need to do is we need to set up our loop. Okay, so we're using row, and we're starting in the first column, and we want it to do it 100 times, and we want it to step through this loop, increasing the value by 1 each time. And then once it hits our next statement, it will then go back to the top of the loop. Okay, so we have our loop down. So the next thing we want to do is we want to set up our cell reference. Again, I'm always reusing my code because it's easier. Okay. Now, by the way, when you're coding this, it's always a good idea to indent code when it's inside a loop, because it makes the code much easier to read. You'll see I did that without mentioning it in the code earlier in the video. Okay, so we've got our cell reference, and just for the moment, I'm just going to go with row. And the first thing I do, I just want to make sure my loop's working as we want it to work. Okay, so we can push play, and there's something wrong. Oh, it's because I put counter in. So you'll see that the reason there's an error is because I copied the code, but I didn't change all the variables. So the variable we're using this time is row rather than counter. Push play. Okay, and then we have our 100 values there. Okay. So so once we've got that, we've got our loop up and running. Now we need to start to work out what the display of the value is going to be. So remember that we wanted it to have a 1 times 2. So that means that the row value in this case we can use, because it's going to start at 1, and then it's going to go to 2, then 3, then 4. So that's actually this part of the statement we have working. Okay, so effectively we have all that right. The next thing we want to do is we want to put in a multiplication symbol. So I'm going to put an and I'm going to put a talking mark, then I'm going to put the X in, and a space on either side, because that will space it. So when we push play on the code and run it again, now we have our times by all of our times table. Okay. Now the next one on the list here is we need to add each and every time the value 2, because we're not changing that. So that means that we can put in 2, and beyond that we're also putting in the equal sign. So I'm going to add a space and an equal sign and another space. Okay, and then we can run our code again. And as you get more confident, by the way, I'm rechecking the code regularly, but as you get more confident, you don't need to do that. You can write a whole chunk of code and then work out what's wrong with it. Okay, so we've got most of what we want. The only thing left is to put in the answer. Okay, so for the answer, what we want to do is we actually want to do the calculation on the fly and put that data into the end, so that the mathematical function makes sense. So to do that, we need an and value, and then we need to put in, well, each and every time we're using the row value, so that's going to be the row, and then we're going to be multiplying it by the value 2. So if we multiply by 2, okay, that's going to give us the calculation that we want. So we push play now and we check our code, you'll see that we have the 2 times table up to 100, exactly as we would like it. Alrighty guys, I hope you found that useful, and it's starting to all make sense. If you want to join us in the next video, what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at if statements. Alrighty guys, thanks very much. See you later.